What's going on, guys? Welcome back to your Lake Fort Guide. In today's video, we're going to give you a full breakdown and in-depth preview of the 2021 Bassmaster Classic from Lake Ray Roberts. Lake Ray Roberts, located north of Fort Worth, Texas, just outside of Denton, Texas. Beautiful lake. First thing that I can say about Lake Ray Roberts, absolutely gorgeous lake. We've had wonderful weather while we've been here. I've thoroughly enjoyed my time on the lake. It's not an overly big lake by the standards of what the Elite Series fishes on at times, but the Bassmasters Classic is a much smaller field. So by those standards, this is going to be a huge fishery where these guys should be able to all spread out and kind of have their own fish to themselves, you would think. Now, we never know how that's going to shake out, but it's a very complicated fishery. If you've never been here, there's milfoil, there's coontail, there's about 18 different types of shoreline grasses, there's some lily pads, there's 1,000 different types of rock in this lake, there's clay, there's kind of some silty, sandy bottoms. There's more timber than you could ever shake a stick at. There's cedar flats, bodark flats with extremely hard woods. There's oak flats. There's just all different kinds of timber in here. Structure-wise, there's pond dams plentiful. There's a million bridges with riprap on this lake and bridge pilings. There is, of course, there's points and humps galore out here. A lot of elevation change in this lake. There are some massive creek channel drop-offs in this lake. You know, one thing about this lake, it's not nearly as old as some other lakes, and the bottom content here, a lot of it is much harder, so it's not going to silt in as much. So a lot of the contour lines are more sharp and more dramatic and bigger drop-offs than what we're used to throughout most of the state of Texas, unless you're in West Texas. That has a lot of the rocky bluff wall stuff like that. But you know, where a lot of our bass fishing is done in Texas is East Texas, where I'm from, and those lakes just don't have these kind of bottom contour structure changes like you find at Ray Roberts. It's kind of a blend of East Texas and West Texas. You got a little grass, you got a little clay, you got some West Texas rock and West Texas structure changes. It's got a little bit of everything. It really does. And it's made it very challenging for me as a guy who's never fished here over the last couple of days, trying to figure it out and dial it in. I've always heard this lake is tough, and I'm starting to understand kind of why this lake can be tough. It's a big lake that just has so much stuff. I mean, just right here in this one little section of creek, I mean, there's a point right here, there's a point right here, there's 2 points off that island out there, there's timber everywhere, there's a creek channel that winds through. This is one tiny little section. These fish have so much stuff to get on at Lake Ray Roberts that I think this is going to make a very good test for our Bassmaster Classic. And today we're doing a preview of the Bassmaster Classic, and I'm excited to watch this tournament because every time I watch these guys on a lake that I'm familiar with, I learn something. I always learn a ton. And Lake Ray Roberts is going to be no exception. Like, if you fish Lake Ray Roberts, this tournament is going to be a great opportunity for you to learn about this fishery, because these guys are the best in the world and they're going to dial things in and figure it out. But these guys are going to they've got a challenge in front of them now. I'm telling you, there's some big fish in this lake. One thing about it, the average size fish you catch is through the freaking roof. It's awesome. It's a really good lake. It's got really big fish in it. It's got a ton of bait and life in it. But they're going to be challenged with a very big, complex fishery that's going to be kind of like finding a needle in a haystack to find, you know, numbers of consistent bites. It's what it feels like to me anyway. Somebody's probably going to do it because they're the best in the world. So it'll be really interesting and educational to see how these guys break it down, and the guys that are successful at it, what it is that they're doing and kind of where they're doing it and all that good stuff. Now, what's going on at Lake Ray Roberts right now is there's definitely, if you watch the last video, definitely, clearly, a shad spawn happening. There doesn't seem to be a lot of bass on the shad spawn all the time. I don't know, this lake might not have, compared to some of the other species in the lake, This lake might not have a huge population of largemouth bass in it. We caught more Gasper on the shad spawn yesterday morning than we did largemouth bass. We only caught the one largemouth. Of course, I had David with me, and he caught a couple little ones that you guys didn't see on camera in his boat. So I guess we did catch more largemouth. But, you know, that shad spawn deal that we hit yesterday morning, it couldn't have been set up any better. I could see them on my Lowrance Active Target. I was actually targeting those fish with the Lowrance Active Target where I stole my crankbait at. But I could see the different game fish and all the bait. There was so many shad. There was millions of shad pushed up on that point that extends out off that ridge. The wind was blowing right into it. The birds were sitting on the ridge pushing the shad back out. Like, it was set up like if I find that on Lake Fork, I'm going, oh my God, like we're about to destroy them. And we would. Yet here on Lake Ray Roberts, we only caught a few bass, 2 small ones and 1 good one. But there's definitely a shad spawn going on. If one of these guys, and I'm sure some of these guys are going to find it, and you're going to see, I think the shad spawn will still be going. I know the tournament's almost a month away, 3 or 4 weeks away. I think the shad spawn, with as cool as water temps are, there's probably still going to be happening in early June when they're here. So we're going to see those guys start their morning, some of them on a shad spawn deal, I believe. Shallow points, wind-blown shallow points, just like you saw us in the last video start the morning. If one of those guys can find a stretch, a bank, a point, something that's holding predominantly largemouth bass, that's going to be such a big deal in this tournament, because after my experience on Lake Ray Roberts, I don't think most of the field's not going to get a ton of bites. I just don't see most of the field going out and just whacking numbers of fish every day. I could be completely wrong, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be more of a grinded out type of deal. Catch some big ones, but it's going to be a grind. Now after that, it's going to get a little scattered. I really think you're going to have guys that are going to find some fish on some structure. You know, we're here a little early. The water temps are still 70 degrees. Now, normally in May, it wouldn't be early at all. It'd be offshore structure time. But this year's different. You know, everything, April and March kind of stayed cooler than normal. We had the big freeze in February that kind of set everything back a little bit. And then we just haven't really warmed up the way we normally do. So the water temps are definitely way behind. By the time they get here in June, there's going to have to be some offshore structure fish. And I think what you'll see is shad spawn and then guys fishing medium to deeper depth offshore structure. I found some stuff out here this week that I looked at, that I graphed, that looked really good. There just wasn't fish on them. There's a creek bend in one of these creeks that goes from 20 foot to 6 foot. And there's a big 6 foot flat that goes up from 6 foot all the way up to 3 and 4 foot in one area of it. But there's a shell bed on top of that. There's a huge shell. So like something like that could totally play, and there's timber all around it. I think you're going to see offshore structure fishing, which means this might be the first Bassmaster Classic that we see get won using forward-facing sonars. That's a very real possibility. You're probably going to see a lot of guys looking at forward-facing sonars after the shad spawns over in the morning. But I don't think by June, it's so hard to say because there's a few weeks left, and you know things change rapidly once you get out of the spawn and start going in that post spawn. Things can change so fast. But what'll be interesting to see is, can a guy, you know, and I know I talk about him a lot on the channel, but Patrick Walters is, you know, had the biggest win using the forward-facing sonar. Can a guy like Patrick Walters or one of these other guys, can they get and specifically target bigger fish and get 5 a day of those bigger fish and really have a big weight at the end of the tournament? I think there's a very strong possibility you're going to see a guy out in timber around some type of structure, creek, channel, point, whatever, who knows, but you're going to see a guy live scope and active target, whatever you want to call it, timber like this out here in the middle, and they're going to be looking at them. And that guy that catches 5 big ones a day doing that, I really think that guy's going to have a chance to win it. Because the shad spawn's going to play, but I just don't see anybody, from what I've seen, I don't see anybody getting a big limit off the shad spawn all 3 days in a row on Ray Roberts. It just doesn't feel like that's there to be had right now. I do feel like there'll be some guys that catch a few big ones on a shad spawn and get a big start to their tournament. It's going to help them a lot. But I really think where this tournament's going to be won is going to be somewhere out there in the middle, more main lake oriented more than likely. And I think they're going to be looking at them on forward-facing sonar. I really do. You could very well have a guy that's out there fishing offshore structure that's doing it old school style. It's not really using the forward-facing sonars. But I do believe for sure this tournament's going to be won off the bank. There's still a lot of fish up shallow, and there's probably still going to be some guys probably could target a big one or two on a bed, But the problem is you can't see them on beds very well on Ray Roberts. A lot of the banks drop off pretty steep, and the water, it looks really clear when you're out in the middle of the lake, but when you get on the bank, it's just a little bit of murkiness to it. It's just not easy to see these fish spawning. There's not just a ton of great spawning habitat and flat areas in this lake. A lot of it's steeper dropping, sparser cover. There won't, not as many of them get in there. And again, guys, I feel like in this lake, there's just not an overly abundant population of largemouth. I think the ones that live here are big, but I don't think there's just a ton of them. So you cover tons of water and you just really don't see but 2 or 3 bedfish right now. And this should have been a good bed fishing week with the moon cycle we were in while I was here. So water temps are right for it, moon cycle is right for it, and there just wasn't a lot up that you could see. So I don't think that the shallow water fishing is going to be the deal. There is a couple areas of grass. The problem is right now, there's a huge carp spawn happening in that grass. There's carp spawning everywhere in that stinking grass, and they're literally muddying the grass flats up. And the grass that is growing isn't growing very deep that I've found. Most of the grass is growing to 2 or 3 foot, maybe towards 4 foot, but really 2 or 3 foot. And that could hold some fish this time of year, no doubt about it. It could hold fish in June with the temps we have this year. But those carp have just destroyed it. Now, if those carp wrap up their deal and that water in that grass clears up some, those fish can move back in there. And then you might see a guy throwing a bladed jig or a swim jig or a swim bait or a frog or, you know, just shallow water grass fishing techniques. We could see some of that, but I don't think that's going to win this tournament. I really believe this tournament's going to be won out in the middle of the pond. One other thing that's going on in this event is there's some guys that didn't make it that this tournament would set up really well for. You know, everybody's talking about it right now because he just won at Lake Fork, but Lee Livesey, he knows this lake. He's fished plenty of derbies on this lake, and he's very, very good in May and June. That pattern he ran on Lake Fork, he runs that pattern, and then he fishes offshore. And I know from guiding on the same lake as him for years, that dude is as good as anybody when it comes to that style of fishing. This deal would be right in his wheelhouse. It's a Bassmaster Classic. I know he's sick that he didn't qualify last year for it. It's very unfortunate because I think he would have done really well. Another guy that didn't qualify is Keith Combs. These fish should be starting to pull out and get set up offshore structure. Anytime you get fish in a post spawn set up on offshore structure, the deep crankbait plays. And if the deep crankbait plays, Keith Combs is about as good as it gets. He's probably the best in the world at it right now. So it's kind of a shame we're not going to see some of those guys in this event. I think they would bring a lot to it, and they would have really, really good events. But either way, it is the Bassmaster freaking Classic. It's in Texas. I'm so happy. You know, we had the Lake Conroe one in Texas. This one's in the DFW area, but it's just awesome to have all the tournament fishing at the top level that we've had in the state of Texas this year. And had to have the Super Bowl of bass fishing, the big one, the Bassmaster Classic, be in Texas is awesome. I'm going to be at the Classic, so if you're around and you see me, please come say hello. I would love to meet you guys. I'll be spending some time on the water. I'll be spending some time at the expo. I'm going to try and bounce around and be a little bit of everywhere. So if you see me, holler at me. We're going to do tournament coverage just like we did at Lake Fork. We're going to do that out here at Ray Roberts. But overall, I'm just so excited, man. I'm excited it's in Texas. I'm excited I'm going to get to be here. And I'm excited to learn from these guys now that I've been out on this fishery for a couple days and kind of got to see what I've seen of it. I'm really looking forward to seeing what they make of it and how they produce bites, because it's going to be a learning experience and very interesting. So I'm pretty fired up, man. Hope you guys are as well. It'll also be interesting to see how our Fish Life app does, because every time we have one of these major tour level events, the leaders are like several of the leaders are always around Fish Life spots on whatever lake it is, whether it was the Classic at Conroe, whether they're at Sam Rayburn, whether they're at Lake Fork. I mean, the spot Lee won on was on the app when he won on it. It'll be interesting to see if Ray Roberts pans out the same way. And if you want some help on any of your fisheries in this area, we've got several lakes on the Fish Life app that you can go subscribe to a premium package on any of those lakes, and you're going to get a guy like myself on the water full time, is updating that package every single month, giving you the best areas to fish, telling you what type of area it is, what baits to use. So go check that out. If you guys want to explore some of these lakes around here that we have, you can download the app for free, scroll through the list of lakes, see what we got. If one of them interests you, subscribe to it, and you will get by far the most current and detailed information that is available in the bass fishing world. All right, hey, thank you guys so much for watching our last preview of the Bassmaster Classic. A few weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks more, and then we're going to have some tournament coverage. I'm really looking forward to doing it. Appreciate you guys watching as always. We'll see you next time right here on your Lake Fork Guide.